We've all heard the tales of naval warfare, steel titans breathing fire, shells the size of cars screaming across the water. The age of the battleship, a time when a nation's power was measured in the tonnage of its fleet and the caliber of its guns. But there's a night in the Second World War where the rules don't just bend, they shatter. A night where the most powerful warships afloat are humbled, not by bigger ships, not by deadlier cannons, but by something that looked like it belonged in a museum, a biplane, covered in fabric and held together by wire. 21 of them. How could an aircraft that was already obsolete when the war began send 3 modern battleships to the bottom of their own harbor? This is the story of how it happened. This is Taranto. The year is 1940. The world is on fire. In Europe, Britain stands alone against the Axis powers. The war isn't just fought in the skies over London or the fields of France. It's fought on the sea lanes. And the most critical body of water on the planet is the Mediterranean. It is Britain's imperial lifeline. The highway connecting it to Egypt, the Suez Canal, and the oil of the Middle East. Control the Med, you control the flow of armies, supplies, and fuel. Lose it, and North Africa falls. The war in that theater is over. And standing right in the middle of this highway, blocking the path, is Italy's navy, the Regia Marina. And it is a formidable force. Anchored in the southern Italian port of Taranto is the beating heart of Italian sea power. 6 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers. It is a textbook example of a fleet in being. It doesn't even have to leave port to be a threat. Its mere existence forces the British Royal Navy to keep its own powerful ships tied down, shadowing them, unable to be used elsewhere in the world where they are desperately needed. The Italian fleet is a knife held to the throat of the British Empire's supply lines. Convoys to the besieged island of Malta are a bloodbath. Every mission is a gamble. The commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet is a man named Andrew Cunningham, Admiral Sir Andrew Brown Cunningham. A hard man for a hard job. His philosophy is simple and brutal. He believes ships are made to be used. His standing order to his fleet is a reflection of the man himself: sink, burn, and destroy. Cunningham knows he cannot win a war of attrition. He is outnumbered. He needs a knockout blow. He needs to change the math. He needs Taranto. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources that get to the heart of the operation. We're not just reading a Wikipedia page. We're drawing from specialized works like Charles Stevenson's 2003 book, The Battle of Taranto, the first strike on a fleet in harbor, which provides a minute-by-minute breakdown, and Angelo N. Caravaggio's detailed 2006 analysis in the Naval War College Review, which dissects the long-term planning. These sources show that what happened wasn't a fluke. It was a meticulously planned assassination. Now back to the information. The idea of hitting the Italian fleet in its lair was not new. It was born 5 years earlier, in 1935, during the Abyssinia crisis. A Royal Navy captain, Lumley Lister, serving aboard the carrier HMS Glorious, had wargamed a carrier-based torpedo attack on Taranto. He and his pilots practiced for it. The plan was shelved, but Lister, now a rear admiral, never forgot. When war broke out, he dusted it off. He was now in command of the brand new aircraft carrier, HMS Illustrious, and he brought the plan to Admiral Cunningham. Cunningham, ever the aggressor, saw its potential immediately. It was codenamed Operation Judgment. The plan was insane on paper. Taranto Harbor was not the open sea. It was a protected anchorage, divided into an outer harbor, the Mar Grande, and an inner harbor, the Mar Piccolo. The Italian ships were moored there, surrounded by defenses. There were supposed to be nearly 90 barrage balloons. Their thick steel cables designed to rip the wings off any low-flying aircraft. There were 21 batteries of 4-inch anti-aircraft guns and over 200 smaller 20mm and 13.2mm machine guns ready to fill the sky with hot metal. There were powerful searchlights positioned to blind any incoming pilots. And most importantly, there were anti-torpedo nets. These massive steel mesh curtains hung in the water, designed to stop any torpedo before it could reach a ship's hull. The harbor itself was another defense. The average depth in the Mar Grande was only about 12 meters, or 40 feet. A standard aerial torpedo dropped from a plane would plunge down over 30 meters before leveling out and running towards its target. In Taranto, it would simply slam into the muddy seabed and be wasted. To succeed, the British had to solve all these problems. They needed perfect intelligence. They needed to overcome the nets. They needed to solve the shallow water problem. And they needed to do it at night, flying an aircraft that many considered a joke. Meet the ferry Swordfish. To look at it, you'd think it was a relic from the First World War, not the Second. A biplane with a fixed landing gear. Its fuselage was a metal frame covered in stretched, doped linen fabric. You could literally punch a hole in it. Its top speed was a laughably slow 224 kilometers per hour, or 139 miles per hour. A modern battleship could almost outrun it into a headwind. The crews gave it an affectionate, if unglamorous, nickname, the string bag. Like the string shopping bags of the era, it seemed like you could cram anything into it, and that was its genius. It was stable. It was reliable. It could take off from a short carrier deck with a massive 1,800-pound torpedo slung underneath, and its very slowness was an advantage. For a torpedo run, you wanted to be low and slow to ensure an accurate drop. The men who flew them were a special breed. The Fleet Air Arm was the underdog of the British military, often overlooked in favor of the Royal Air Force. The Swordfish crews flew in open cockpits, exposed to the elements. The pilot sat up front. Behind him, facing backwards, sat the observer, who was the navigator, bombardier, and gunner all in one. Sometimes a third crewman, a telegraphist, gunner, was squeezed in as well. For the Taranto raid, it would be just 2 men per plane, 2 men wrapped in leather and courage, flying a fabric kite into a fortress of steel. The British worked the problems one by one. The shallow water issue was solved with ingenuity. They attached a drum to the nose of each torpedo and a wire spoiler to the tail. When dropped, the drum would create drag and lift, preventing the torpedo from diving too deep. They also figured out they could drop the torpedoes from an extremely low altitude, less than 30 feet off the water, giving it no time to dive before it had to run. The torpedo nets were a bigger problem, but here, fortune favored the bold. On the 6th of November, just 5 days before the planned attack, a Martin, Maryland reconnaissance aircraft from Malta flew a high-altitude photo mission over Taranto. The pictures brought back stunning news. RAF photo analysts, poring over the images, noticed that many of the barrage balloons were down. A recent storm had damaged them, and the Italians, not expecting an attack, hadn't put them all back up. Even better, the photos revealed gaps in the torpedo net coverage around the massive battleships. The British now had a map to victory. They knew exactly where to aim. The original plan called for a 2-carrier strike, HMS Illustrious and the older HMS Eagle. But at the last minute, Eagle suffered damage to its fuel system and had to pull out. Now, it was all on Illustrious. 5 of Eagle's experienced Swordfish crews were transferred to Illustrious to bring the strike force up to strength. On the evening of November 11th, 1940, 170 miles southeast of Taranto, HMS Illustrious turned into the wind. The deck was a controlled chaos of roaring engines, shouting men, and the smell of high-octane fuel. 21 Swordfish were readied. One suffered a burst auxiliary fuel tank and had to be abandoned. Another had a problem with its landing gear and was also left behind. The first wave was now just 12 aircraft, 6 carrying torpedoes, 4 carrying bombs to act as diversions, and 2 carrying flares to illuminate the harbor. Their mission was to fly for nearly 3 hours in the dark, find a heavily defended port, and attack the most powerful ships in the Italian Navy. You are Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Hooch Williamson of 815, Naval Air Squadron. It is just before 9 in the evening. The engine of your Swordfish biplane is a deafening roar in the open cockpit. The cold Mediterranean air whips at your face. Below you, the black shape of HMS Illustrious falls away into the even blacker sea. You are leading the first wave. For the next hour and 40 minutes, you fly in total darkness, navigating by instruments and starlight. Your target is a place you've only ever seen in photographs. Then, on the horizon, a faint glow. The lights of Taranto. The Italians feel safe. So safe they haven't even imposed a full blackout. As you get closer, your observer, Lieutenant Scarlett, points. The Italian anti-aircraft batteries have opened up. Not at you. They're firing blindly into the sky, a routine barrage, unaware you are just minutes away. You push the stick forward, descending to wave-top height. Your wingman, flying one of the flare droppers, climbs high. At 10:58 p.m., his aircraft releases its first parachute flare. The harbor below ignites in a harsh, magnesium-white glare. And there they are, 6 battleships. Lined up like toys, it's a target-rich environment. But your eyes are locked on one row of ships in the Mar Grande, the Cavour-class battleships. The flak starts now. Red, green, and white tracer rounds, stitch patterns in the night sky. Puffs of black smoke from the heavy guns blossom around you. The noise is a physical force. You ignore it. You're flying at 90 miles per hour, 30 feet above the water. The torpedo is armed. You line up on the battleship Conte di Cavour. The ship's guns are firing. But they're firing too high. They can't depress their barrels low enough to hit you. You are inside their kill zone, and you are untouchable, At 700 yards, you press the release button. The string bag lurches upwards, suddenly 1,800 pounds lighter. You bank hard to the right, pulling away. Behind you, Scarlet screams in the intercom, "Got her! We got her!" A massive column of water and black smoke erupts from the side of the Cavour. The first blow has landed. Another Swordfish, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Kemp, is right behind you. He's going for the newest, most powerful ship in the Italian fleet, the battleship Littorio. He flies straight through the wall of fire. His observer, Lieutenant Bailey, guides him in. They drop their torpedo. Another perfect run. Another explosion that rips a 40-foot hole in Littorio's bow. The other planes of the first wave follow. 2 drop bombs on the cruisers and oil storage depot in the inner harbor, adding to the smoke and confusion. By 11:15 p.m., the first wave is gone, streaking back into the darkness, but the attack is only half over. An hour later, the second wave arrived. This time there were only 9 aircraft, but they were all that was needed. Led by Lieutenant Commander J. Dadapja Hale of 819 Squadron, they flew into a hell the first wave had created. The Italians were now fully alert. Every gun that could bear was firing. Searchlights swept the sky, desperately trying to catch the slow-moving biplanes in their beams. The smoke from the burning oil depot was thick, obscuring the targets. Hale's plane was hit almost immediately, shredding his controls, but he managed to launch his torpedo at the Littorio before turning for home. Another Swordfish, piloted by Lieutenant Williams, dives through the inferno and puts a second torpedo into the already wounded Littorio, this time in the stern. Meanwhile, another pilot, Lieutenant Bailey, can't find the primary targets through the smoke. He circles, looking for a ship of value. He spots the battleship Caio Duilio. He lines up his run, flying so low his wheels almost touch the water. He drops his torpedo. It strikes the Duilio on its starboard side, blasting another huge hole below the waterline. One last Swordfish, flown by Sub-Lieutenant Slaughter, puts a torpedo into the heavy cruiser Trento, though it fails to explode. The second wave is over in 20 minutes. As they race for the safety of the sea, one Swordfish is caught by the flak and shot down. Lieutenant Bailey and his observer, Lieutenant Slaughter, are killed. They are the only British casualties of the raid. By 1:30 in the morning on November 12th, all surviving aircraft had landed back on HMS Illustrious. The flight deck was a scene of jubilation. The crews knew they had done damage, but they didn't know how much. The full picture would have to wait for the morning light and another reconnaissance flight. If you believe in telling history with this level of detail, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The success at Taranto wasn't just luck. It was the result of years of doctrinal development within the Fleet Air Arm, a process detailed in publications like the Royal Navy's own staff histories, now declassified at the National Archives in Kew, London. These documents show a persistent effort to perfect the techniques of night carrier operations and shallow water torpedo attacks long before the war began. This was not a gamble. It was a calculated execution. Now, back to the story. As dawn broke over Taranto, the scale of the disaster for the Italian Navy became horrifyingly clear. The pride of their fleet was in ruins. The battleship Conte de Cavour had a 160-square-foot hole in her hull. The water rushed in, and despite a desperate struggle by her crew, she slowly settled to the bottom of the harbor, her decks awash. She would eventually be refloated. But she would never be fully repaired and would never fight again. The brand new Littorio, the most powerful warship in the Mediterranean, was in even worse shape. Hit by 3 torpedoes, she was severely flooded both fore and aft. To save her from sinking completely, her crew had to run her aground. It would take 4 months of difficult work just to get her to a dry dock for repairs. She would be out of the war until March of 1941. The battleship Caio Duilio was also hit by a single torpedo, and it was also beached to prevent her from sinking. She would require even longer to repair, not rejoining the fleet until May of 1941. In a single 90-minute attack, 20 British airmen, flying in obsolete biplanes, had crippled 3 Italian battleships, damaged a cruiser and 2 destroyers, and destroyed the oil storage facility. The cost to the British was 2 aircraft lost and 2 men killed. Admiral Cunningham received the news aboard his flagship. He sent a signal that would become legendary. Taranto, and the night of November 11th to 12th, or 1940, flies, should be remembered forever as having shown once and for all that in the Fleet Air Arm, the Navy has its most devastating weapon. He was right. In one stroke, the balance of naval power in the Mediterranean had been turned on its head. The Italian battle fleet, which had 6 battleships, was now reduced to 3. The British, with their 3 battleships in the theater, had achieved parity. More than parity, they had seized the initiative. The remaining Italian battleships and cruisers were immediately withdrawn from Taranto and moved to the port of Naples, further north. This was a strategic victory in itself. By forcing the Italian fleet to relocate, the British had eased the threat to their crucial convoy route through the central Mediterranean to Malta. The shockwaves from Taranto spread far beyond the Mediterranean. In the embassies and naval attachés, offices around the world, military planners took notice. An audacious, carrier-based air attack had successfully neutralized a battle fleet in its own protected harbor. The age-old supremacy of the battleship had been called into question. And no one was paying closer attention than the Imperial Japanese Navy. At the time, Japan was planning its own war of conquest in the Pacific. Its primary obstacle was the United States Pacific Fleet, anchored at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The Japanese High Command, led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, had been contemplating a surprise attack to cripple the American fleet, but the challenges seemed immense. Pearl Harbor, like Taranto, was a shallow anchorage. A conventional torpedo attack was thought to be impossible, but Taranto changed everything. A Japanese naval delegation, led by their naval attaché in Berlin, Captain Takeshi Naito, was dispatched to Italy to study the Taranto attack firsthand. They were given full access by the Italians. They inspected the sunken ships, interviewed Italian officers, and analyzed the tactics used by the British. They learned about the modified torpedoes, the low-level attack runs, and the use of flares. Their reports were sent back to Tokyo and studied with intense interest by the architects of the Pearl Harbor attack, Commander Minoru Genda and Admiral Yamamoto himself. Taranto was not just an inspiration, it was a proof of concept. It showed that a small number of carrier aircraft, flown with skill and daring, could inflict catastrophic damage on a fleet at anchor. The Japanese took the lessons to heart. They began to develop their own shallow water torpedoes, famously fitting them with wooden fins to control their depth after being dropped. The attack on Taranto provided them with the technical and tactical blueprint for their own, much larger, Operation Z. 13 months later, on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese would launch their own surprise carrier strike on Pearl Harbor, with even more devastating results. The ghost of the ferry Swordfish flew with the Japanese Zeros and Kates that day. The story of Taranto is more than just a famous battle. It is a turning point in the history of warfare. It marks the moment the aircraft carrier replaced the battleship as the capital ship, the true queen of the seas. The battleship, that massive floating fortress of steel and fire, had ruled the oceans for centuries. But its reign was ended in 90 minutes by 21 planes made of wood, linen, and wire. And what of the machines themselves? The great Italian battleships, symbols of national pride, met ignominious ends. The Conte di Cavour never sailed again and was scrapped after the war. The Littorio, renamed Italia, and the Caio Duilio were surrendered to the Allies and were also eventually broken up for scrap. Their power was an illusion, shattered in one night. And the ferry Swordfish, the humble string bag, it would go on to serve throughout the entire war, hunting U-boats in the Atlantic, spotting for naval guns, and flying from the decks of tiny escort carriers. It outlasted many of the more modern aircraft designed to replace it, a testament to its simple, rugged design. The very thing that made it look obsolete was what made it so effective. The final, quiet postscript to the raid came decades later. In 1992, the wreck of one of the two Swordfish shot down that night, serial number L4AI, was discovered and recovered from the sea floor off Taranto. Inside, they found the remains of its crew, Lieutenant G. W. L. A. Bailey, and Lieutenant H. J. A. Slaughter. After more than 50 years at the bottom of the sea, they were finally brought home and buried with full military honors. A reminder that behind the grand strategy and the shifting tides of war are the individual acts of courage. Steel trusts its own strength. Fabric and courage trust the plan. In one night, the age of the battleship was over. It just didn't know it yet.